Okay, hello YouTube. Today we're going to be covering the dragon variation. So after e4, c5, knight of 3, d6, d4, cd4, knight d4, knight f6, knight c3, g6 begins the dragon, bishop e3, bishop g7, and we're going to have the main line Yugoslav, f3, knight c6, queen d2, castles kingside, and we're covering this line 9, castles queenside, and responding to it with the absolute main move, which is the move pawn to d5. So here there's a multitude of replies that white can try. He can try knight c6 followed by bishop h6, he can try king b1, queen e1, and all of these moves are going to get their own video, but right now we're just going to be taking a look at the main line, which is e takes d5, knight d5, knight c6, bc6, and then bishop to d4, offering this exchange of bishops. Now there are two alternatives here for black. Black can try both knight c3 and bishop d4, and I'm going to cover those in another video covering those two alternatives, but the main line is just pawn to e5, which is going to be the focus of this video. So here we're going to have bishop to c5, and this kind of begins the main line. So if you like content like this and want to see more of it, please hit that subscribe button, click on your notification icon, and please subscribe to the channel. So you have these multiple threats here in this position. White is threatening to take the knight on d5. He's triple attacking it, knight, queen, and rook. So he's threatening knight d5, cd5, queen d5, which would win a whole pawn. And he's also threatening your rook on f8. So the first thing you have to figure out is which one of these two things is more important to defend, the rook or the pawn. And the answer to that is the pawn, absolutely the pawn. And the reason is, of course, because if you lose that pawn, you're losing the entire center of the board. So the center is really important. But the second reason for that is bishop takes f8 is simply not a threat. White is actually not threatening to take that rook at all. If white does play bishop takes f8, after queen f8, black's position is nearly decisive. I know that's difficult to comprehend, but black's position is nearly decisive here. The reason is because white has no more defense on the dark squares, and black is basically threatening to control all the dark squares. He's threatening to bring this bishop here, the queen is covering that diagonal, the bishop can also cover this diagonal, and then this diagonal with this bishop is very dangerous, and even this rook can get involved. So basically white's whole queen side is in danger of falling apart, and that happens to be where the white king is. As a matter of fact, if white just continues with a very natural move right here, black could win on the spot. So like if white were to play something like h4, pause the video, see if you can see the move, black wins. Bishop h6 just pins the queen to the king, and the game is effectively over. You can't even block with pawn f4, we just play bishop takes, and that's it, you lose a whole queen. So if we were to play this, like bishop f8, queen f8, white would have to sidestep the threat of bishop h6. So initially white would have to play something like king b1. And now, the very next move that you would play is you would play this move pawn to e4. And this is a really critical move. You play this move pawn to e4 to open up the bishop, open up the queen, threaten to play rook b8, go after the king. At this point, white's position is lost. There is no way to defend against all these threats. Whenever this pawn is available to move forward like this, in a position like this, you should move it forward and sacrifice that pawn immediately. Because that pawn, it can't even be captured. The position is so bad. If f captures e4, we have knight c3 check, bc3, rook b8, king a1, queen a3 is mating. We're threatening queen b2, we're threatening queen a2 mate, we're threatening queen b2 mate, we're threatening bishop takes c3 check. Every mate threat on the board is possible. Really, the only thing white could do is just like throw something in the way, play like queen d8 check, just to delay the inevitable of getting mated, just to delay it by giving up your queen. So queen a3 is just game over. So could we take it with something else? Could we play knight takes e4? So knight takes e4, similar problem. Rook b8. We have huge threats against the white king. We're threatening rook takes b2 or bishop b2, pawn to c3, pawn f5, and you would actually just have to leave the knight there, because if the knight moves, knight takes c3 is just resigns. So basically, if you allow this position and you allow e4, your position is effectively lost. This is effectively game over. There's nothing here. The computer's best line is actually just knight takes d5, c takes d5, f takes e4, and then rook b8. And after b3, queen a3, queen c1, queen c5, queen d2, a5, the engine gives decisive advantage black. Black is threatening a4 and just continuing the attack with all of his pieces aiming at the white king. So this is just effectively game over. So anyway, so going back, so why do we not... this is why we don't care about bishop f8. And this is also why white's next move is played. White needs to play this move knight to e4, which blockades the e-pawn and prevents e5 to e4. That's the reason for white's next move. Now, black's next move, which is played by every top player, at least to me, like requires more explanation. The next move that black almost invariably plays here is this move Rook E8. Now I know you're thinking, oh, that move's obvious. My rook was attacked, I moved it, the bishop is worth less than the rook. Of course I have to move my rook at some point, so why not move it now? But to me it's not obvious. Because to me, that rook is not being threatened. Because even with the knight on e4, there is no threat. There's no threat if bishop takes f8. The bishop is not worth less than the rook in this position. The bishop is worth more than the rook. If bishop takes f8, queen f8, even with the knight blockading on the e4 square, I have all the dark squares. I'm threatening bishop h6, which would, pin the queen. If the king sidesteps to b1, the king is in a firing range of dark squares. I still have rook b8, etc., continuing my attack. This should just be advantage black. Why on earth am I moving a rook that isn't threatened to be captured? And the reason for that is because of where that rook is going to end up in the middle game. It's actually more of a problem of how do I develop my pieces 3 or 4 moves from now, as opposed to just moving the rook to safeguard it right now. So in the past, like go back 30 years, we used to think there was at least one reasonable waiting move in this position. We used to think we could play something like rook b8. So the question is, what about any other reasonable waiting move in this position? Well, there really aren't any. If you play a move like h6, for example, which seems logical, I'm going to play h6 and I'm going to threaten f5. Now the rook is hanging, because after bishop f8, queen f8, I don't have access to that dark square. I don't have access to the h6 square, which means I don't have access to all the dark squares. So after bishop c4 and they just block everything up, this is just decisive advantage white, because I don't have access to all the dark squares like I did a move ago. Okay, so h6 is not a good waiting move, so rook b8 seems like the only reasonable waiting move. And if they play bishop f8, queen f8 here, of course, black has a huge advantage, huge initiative. The rook on the b file is very, very useful. Bishop h6 is back on the table. This is great. The problem is they don't take the rook. So what do you do if they don't take the rook? If they don't take the rook, the only way to improve your position is at some point, like if they play h4, you have to play h6 at some point. Because if they play h4, you need to be able to mate g4 with h6 so that you can mate h5 with g5 or g5 with h5, because you have to close the king side. If you don't close the king side, you're going to get mated over there. So if they play h4, you have to play rook e8 anyway, because you need to mate g4 with h6. So then the question is, what's your strategy moving forward after you've played rook e8 and rook b8? What are you going to do? How are you going to reorganize your pieces to make progress? And the answer is, eventually you're going to get your queen out of the way, and you're going to put the rooks on the d file. You're going to play like rook ed8, rook d7, rook d8. So this move is going to go for, this rook on a8 is going to go from a8 to b8, and then eventually it's going to go to d8 anyway. And that's why nobody plays rook b8 anymore. That's why everybody just plays rook e8, because why should I two-step my rook on a8? Why should I move it twice? It doesn't make sense. So that's why everybody plays rook e8. It's to save a tempo in the middle game. So that's the really long explanation for why we play rook e8. It has nothing to do with safeguarding the rook. It wasn't threatened. It saves a tempo later on. So we have rook e8, and now here we have 3 moves. We have pawn to h4, we have bishop to c4, and we have pawn to c4. So I'm just going to cover h4 and bishop to c4 together because they usually transpose into the same main line, although there are a couple sidelines, which I'm not going to cover, but I am going to cover this move pawn to c4 because it is critical that you know how to play against it. So pawn to c4, you need to play the immediate queen c7, the whole point being that now cd5 is basically impossible. If cd5, you're going to respond with c takes d5, which attacks the knight on e4 and attacks that bishop on the c5 square, which is pinned to the king, and no matter what happens here, it's just going to be a decisive advantage for black. Black has a huge initiative, and black is doing really, really well here. White's king is wide open, and you're getting your material back. So this is just bad. This is just advantage black all day long. So they don't take. They do something else. Usually they'll play something like bishop d6, and if you want it right here, you can just take a perpetual. You can play queen to b6, bishop c5, queen back to c7. But normally we don't just like to run back and forth like this if we've gotten to this point with black. So if bishop to d6, you might need to play for a win. If you don't just want to draw, if you're not playing against a grandmaster and you want to draw, you might just play something like queen c8, and you can continue playing for a win from here if you want. Queen c8 is totally reasonable. Bishop to a3, and now I would say kind of the main move is, again, to devalue your exchange. I would say the main move is to play something like knight f6 and go ahead and give them the exchange. They can play knight to d6, queen a6, knight takes e8, rook takes e8. You can give up this exchange after king b1, e4, and the position is actually quite unclear. Just like in the previous position, the exchange isn't terribly valuable, even with the dark squared bishop on the board here. It's a little bit better for white now that he still has a dark squared bishop to defend the dark squares, but this dark squared bishop on a3 is not ideally placed to defend the dark squares, and black should be able to whip up a pretty decent attack for the exchange. So black should have enough initiative to compensate for the material here. So this is how black can continue to try to play for a win. So the other two moves are basically bishop c4 and h4, and oftentimes they transpose. So really kind of the main line is just to play h4. We have h6, we have g4, we have queen c7, g5, h5, and then bishop c4. And as you can see how these can transpose into each other, they could have began this with bishop c4, and we could have reached the same position. So there's kind of two main moves here. The move that was played between John Elvist and Nakamura, played back in Stillwater in 2007, was rook on a to d8, which seems to make logical sense. And then pretty much everybody plays queen f2 here. And I've run into this position a whole bunch, like online on the internet. Everybody seems to be able to find this position with white. Everybody seems to know the theory. For whatever reason, it doesn't seem hard. The move that Nakamura tried here was rook d7. It's pretty reasonable. And then we had rook d3 happen in that game. And Nakamura replied with f5, and there actually doesn't appear to be anything better. If black continues with something like, say, rook e8, trying to get in knight f4 on some passive move, like bishop b3, knight f4 would be, relatively equal. Rook d7, bishop e6, knight e6. This is equality. But they could just make the most natural move in the position, which is just to double. And then it's not at all clear that knight f4 is any good, and it's not at all clear how black unwinds his position and gets rid of this bind that white has. So this is kind of what white's going for. White has clamped down on black's structure and made it very difficult to move forward. And that's why Nakamura, after rook d7, rook d3, he decided to break out. He played f5 in that game, and it worked out well for him. Takes, and then everything came off. And then he managed to save the endgame with black, even though this is still a very uncomfortable position for black. And the whole way, the computer is saying that white's better in these lines. And actually, previously, Elvis had a slight improvement even, and white would have been even better. But it's saying slight edge white all day long. So that's the reason that I'm kind of recommending against rook a d8, just because everybody knows about queen f2 and everybody finds queen f2. So I'm kind of thinking maybe the way to go is to play rook e d8. Leave that rook on a8. Again, it comes back to, why are we moving this rook from a8 to b8 even, we don't want to lose this tempo. We don't know, maybe the rook belongs on a8. Because now after queen f2, guess what? We're happy that we have that rook on a8, because that is allowing us to play these other moves, because now this a pawn is held. So now we can get away with knight f4 immediately. We can play this equalizing maneuver. And they kind of have to let us equalize, because they have to play bishop e6 and allow some of these exchanges, and we're getting really close to equality. So like bishop d6, queen a5, king b1, rook d7, rook d8. This was actually all played in a couple of very interesting games, and I have a few games on my database where this actually happened. And the correct move here is you're supposed to play rook a d8 first, rook a d1, and then knight d4. And this position is unclear. Black has plenty of compensation for whatever's going on here. Black is doing fine. And some of these games went through a different move order, but rook a d8 is the correct move order. Knight d4 first is a little bit of an inaccuracy. So the question is, what else could white do? Well, white could try bishop to b3. This is also no good. This was played in Najir versus Mista back in 2010. That game continued bishop to d5, and then after rook d2, black can equalize on the spot with knight e6. In that game, black was actually even more ambitious. Black played this move queen a5 and tried to whip up an attack against the white king, and it worked, apparently. And he ended up winning the game with the black pieces. So this is also very reasonable. So that's kind of my recommendation, is rook e d8, and then on queen f2 we're playing the immediate knight f4, and black is getting really close to equality here. Now keep in mind, according to the engine, white's still a little bit better in this position, but it seems like black is doing okay. So this is really the current tibia of the theory, and these are all the main lines, and this is what you're going to need to play if you want to get a reasonable position with the black pieces when you're playing against this main line of the Yugoslav Dragon. So anyways, I hope you found this video helpful. I hope you learned something new about chess, and I hope you can use some of these ideas in your own games. Thank you very much for watching.